Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining this Zoom lecture today. My name is Heather Ross and I'm an artist and PhD researcher at Newcastle University and in conjunction with the Hatton Gallery. I am undertaking a practice-based PhD and this is my final year of study. I'm in my writing up period. And the focus of my PhD study has been the artist Kurt Schwitters, who was born in 1887 and died in 1948. And specifically, I've been looking at his final artwork, which he created in exile in Elterwater in the Lake District, called the Merz Barn, and specifically the Merz Barn Wall, which is now sited in the Hatton Gallery. So for anyone that's not familiar with that artwork, I'll provide a brief summary before moving on to what I'd like to discuss today. So the Merz Barn Wall was formerly part of a larger installation developed within a small barn in rural Elterwater in the Lake District. And the work was started in 1947. But was never completed since Schwitters died in Kendal in January 1948 at the age of just 61. Schwitters referred to this work as his Merz Barn, part of 3 official Merzbau structures, which he developed first in Germany, then in Norway, and finally in England. And the Merzbau is translated as Merz building. And the appearance of this structure changed in accordance with the site in which it was being developed. For example, materials were found and collected in that specific site and integrated into the work, and Schwitters responded to the buildings as found objects, altering their interior, for example, through building columns, niches, and walls. His Merzbauten, as they're referred to collectively, can be described as walking collages and sculptural installations, and they were ever shifting and expanding to accommodate new materials and to reflect Schwitters' ideas. And he described his final Merzbau, the Merz Barn, as the greatest sculpture of my life. And the historian John Elderfield has stated that it was conceived as a culminating artistic statement. And on the screen, I have put 3 examples of structures that are Merzbaus or are related to Schwitters' Merzbau structures. So the image of the woman walking through the interior has been taken from, it's an image of a replica of Schwitters' Hanover Merzbau. So the original Hanover Merzbau was bombed in 1943. And in the 1980s, Peter Bissinger, the Swiss theatre designer, actually created a replica of this, and that's now been permanently housed in the Sprengel Museum in Hanover. The middle image, the black and white photograph, is an image of the Merz Barn Wall and the Merz Barn. It's a profile image of the wall, and this was obviously taken before the Merz Barn Wall was removed. And the third image is of Schwitters' Merz Hyuta, which is actually not one of the structures that Schwitters actually named a Merzbau. However, it has been kind of characterized as a Merzbau. It's got the same kind of aesthetic and same kind of principles that Schwitters was applying to the rest of his Merzbau structures. The other Merzbau, the official Merzbau that he created in Norway, was burnt down in a fire, and there are very limited photographs of this available. So after Schwitters' death, the Merz Barn was initially looked after by Harry Pearce, the owner of the site, and the custodian and owner of the artwork. However, as the years went on, the work started to naturally deteriorate, and Pearce tried to search for an institution that could ensure its survival. So in 1963, the artist and academic Richard Hamilton came to the site on behalf of Newcastle University. And it was later agreed that the wall, being the most resolved part of the artwork, would be moved to the Hatton Gallery. And this was to happen in October 1965. And this is where the work has been permanently housed ever since. Today, my talk, well, actually just before I go on to that, this is an image of the wall being lifted from its site in Elterwater. It's not a very good image, it's an archival photograph, but it gives you an idea of what took place. So today my talk will focus on the Merz Barn Wall in relation to a series of prints which I made between 2019 and 2020. And those prints were entitled the Aerated series, which formed part of my exhibition, The Losses, which was shown in the Hatton Gallery in February 2020, just before we were all thrown into COVID lockdown. So this exhibition concentrated on the Hatton Gallery's archive with respect to how it could be used as a basis of new artwork and to offer new sensorial insights into the wall's history, both as part of the Merz Barn and Elter Waters site and within the Hatton Gallery context. Particularly, I was interested in using this archival material to explore aspects of the wall which are currently unseen and to determine what was missing from our contemporary experience of it. So the focus of this talk is my aerated prints seen in this image here. And I will discuss these prints in connection with Schwitters' aerated body of work. I'll refer to a selection of his other artworks, which articulate his interest in how to depict air and atmosphere and contemplate their conceptual and material relationships to the Merz Barn Wall. And my talk today is entitled, "This is the first real aerated picture." This is the first real aerated picture. It's an etching made using a zinc plate, covered in soft ground and left outside the back door of my house in Preston, Lancashire, the rainiest city in England, between December 2018 and January 2019. There are 11 prints in total in this series of varying size, made at different times of the year, but all involve the same processes, but were placed in different spots in my garden for specific amounts of time. Exposed to the elements, the zinc plates act as instruments of capture for the weather and for creatures to leave their traces of movement on the expanse. The etching process reacts with the marks left in the soft ground to inscribe these traces and trails of interaction as tangible textured surfaces on zinc, an impression of atmosphere and a physical record of weathering over time. Each zinc plate has been printed on highly absorbent leftover blotting paper, which warps and contracts in contact with moisture from the ink and water used to prepare the print. Each print is different colour, selected because of the distinct relationship to the natural world or processes related to erosion and natural decay. But of all the prints, this is the first real aerated picture. And I'd like to start by reading out a few quotes which really set the tone for what I'll be discussing today. And the first quote is by Tasta Dean, or not by Tasta Dean, it's by Ali Smith talking about Tasta Dean's work. And Tasta Dean's work is called A Bag of Air. So Ali Smith writes, "Breathing takes flight, alchemy and transformation become matters of good spirit. Something dismissible and ridiculous and magic, if you let it be, happens in front of your eyes. Then the 3 minutes of black and white film are over, and what's left is the story of human beings and air, something we hardly ever notice or think about, something we can't live without." The second quote has been taken from Kurt Schwitters' writing, I'm Sitting Here with Erica, which was written in 1939 whilst he was in Norway. And he writes, "And lying in the earth, well, on the grass actually, which grows out of the moss and what has become soil in the rocks, and the cat surrounds me, and admittedly in the shadow of the clouds, or more precisely in the sun shadows of the same, and the cat surrounds me." And the final quote that I want to read out today comes from the conservators' reports that I found in the Hatton Gallery archive. And they've written, "The green includes air bubbles." I'm sitting here with the Merz Barn Wall and the air surrounds me. It's been 80 years since Kurt Schwitters proclaimed in the title of an artwork that this is the first real aerated picture, referring to one of 10 works which can be grouped together through the inclusion of the term aerated and by a distinctive use of mark making, a scumbling on the surface, a pointillist style dot, an impressionistic broken application of paint, the kind of visual interference that a printmaker might refer to as noise. Given the use of this term in their title and deployment of this specific stylistic trait, we can assume an intention to depict an experience or sensation of the term aerated, or at least to connect the word with the image in the mind's eye of the viewer. Aerated, to allow air to act on something, to impregnate something with air or gas, to make light or sparkling, to add bubbles and holes, to charge, to inflate, to activate and oxygenize, and to be agitated, angry, or even overexcited, as in, don't get so aerated. The term exudes energy and movement and describes an object or moment to be enlivened by a force, possibly unseen but felt. In Tasta Dean's work, A Bag of Air, she takes flight in a hot air balloon to pursue her desire of capturing a cloud. But of course, it's impossible to catch, keep, or own a cloud. Instead, Dean collects a clean bag of air, captured and contained in a plastic carrier bag, which in turn makes tangible and more visible the atmosphere within which she is living and breathing. Dean's seemingly simple gesture speaks of the chasm between seeing, experiencing, and being able to capture a substance constituted of multiple components, and the mutability of the atmosphere, at times on the edge of perception and continually in flux. The inherent difficulties in being able to effectively depict or describe a subject as erratic as the climate is succinctly expressed in numerous works by Kurt Schwitters. A good example of this is in his poem, When I'm Talking About the Weather, from 1946. Sorry. Composed of 2 lines, he states, "When I'm talking about the weather, I know what I'm talking about." The poem is ironic in its assertion of knowing the unknowable. The weather refers to multiple and varying short-term atmospheric conditions. At times it is invisible or made visible through its interaction and effect on other things. As expressed by Tim Ingold, the weather is not so much an object of perception as what we perceive in, underwriting our very capacities to see, to hear, and to touch. And this notion of subjective experience is given emphasis through Schwitters' use of the pronoun I. I know what I'm talking about, but do you? Terms such as the weather, weathered, and weathering, while distinct, nevertheless point to an external environment and enveloping force that affects one's perception and experience in and of the world. And this was a subject which preoccupied Schwitters, especially within the final decade of his life and during his time in the Lakes. Works such as Windswept from 1946 show fragments of collage compositionally strewn as if blown by the wind. In Ribble Bobble Pimlico, a performed piece of work, the repetition of the phrase Ribble Bobble Pimlico acts as a rhythmic device to conjure the sound of a babbling, burbling brook or river. And in Paper Clouds, as seen here, from 1946 again, Schwitters employs a thin veil of what looks to be white tissue paper to depict their indeterminate appearance. In earlier works, such as Air and Wire Sculpture from 1941, air is given equal weighting as material component of the work. He acknowledges air as a material that is processual and relational, an element that remains open and that cannot be fixed. In his writing, I Am Sitting Here with Erica, from 1936, Schwitters muses over a range of sensations experienced as part of his immediate surroundings. He states, "I'm sitting here with Erica on my lap in an old beer crate in the wet, wet grass, shivering from the evening air, while hosts of tiny midges are constantly tickling me and the cat surrounds me." And in an unpublished manuscript, Merz from 1938, he ponders the perception of colour generated as a consequence of natural climatic substances such as air, haze, and sunlight, stating that the blue in the distant mountains comes from the actual colour of the air, while haze gives distant objects a reddish hue and sunshine drenches all local colours in a yellow gleam. But colour changes over the course of the day, and with the increasing and decreasing pressure of the atmosphere, humidity, or the air, and with the orientation of the sun. Writing to Susanna Friedenthal Luther from Norway in 1935, Schwitters describes how colour is generated by air and by eye, expressing an awareness of his bodily immersion within and as part of the atmospheric. He experienced colour in connection with natural processes, and this approach to the natural world no doubt extended into his experiences of the caves and rocks of the English Lake District. Well-oxygenated sedimentary rock and cave striations can produce rich, rusty reds, yellows, and purples due to the presence of ferric iron, whilst rocks low in oxygen may produce colours such as green and black. Schwitters' aerated series can be seen within the larger context of how to engage with, describe, communicate, record, and deploy strategies as seen in the natural world. His aerated use of mark making has been described by Karen Orchard as contributing to an air of lightness and liveliness in his compositions, implying that the act of scumbling and activating the surface energizes the artwork, as opposed to depicting the atmospheric. Whilst Megan Lukes refers to this broken facture and speckled colour as a strategy for breaking up geometric forms and for obscuring objects. Moreover, Nicholas Wadley relates this to Schwitters' preoccupation with weathered surfaces, worn by their contact with nature, describing them as being very close in form and effect to the richly textured passages of the Merz Barn relief wall. Their analysis points to his distinctive use of mark making as a formal device to disrupt the picture plane or sculptural entity in the case of the Merz Barn relief wall, and as a means of expressing the atmospheric or its effects on those things with which it is in contact, described by Tim Ingold as interfaces between one kind of material and another, for example, rock and air. On a page of Schwitters' personal photo album, we can observe a group of 6 photographs comprising a tree, a brick wall, and a selection of cave and rock formations, which articulate his interest in the interface between one material and another. The dappled light ruptures the surface and appearance of all things. Aerated marks fracture the homogeneity of underlying forms and complicate the distinction between surface, object, and atmosphere. The formal arrangement of these photographs prompts us to search for the source of visual disruption, i.e. the light shining through the tree, reinforcing the idea of a relational structure in which forms and surfaces cannot be thought of as separate from their environment. An aerated patina of marks can be seen on the walls of ice surrounding Schwitters as he navigates his rowing boat through an iceberg in the Norwegian landscape. The image resonates with Nicholas Wadley's analysis of these marks as referring to surfaces fashioned over time and through their contact with natural processes. This same shaping of material is echoed in the plaster surface of the Merz Barn relief wall, which, according to the conservation reports, was formed by applying large strokes, creating concave shapes using a tool such as a broad rounded spatula, the effect of which left traces of Schwitters' working process on the surface of the material. In both instances, material is inscribed by a process enacted over time. Contemplating the similarity an appearance of the Merz Barn Wall, we can infer that Schwitters was attempting to recreate this previous experience of being enveloped by these natural forms, but also that he was using the concaved form as a means of harnessing the natural environment. The hollowed out shape alters how light falls and is dispersed across the surface of the work. Further connections can be drawn between the walls of ice and the Merz Barn Wall with respect to moisture as a source continually altering the appearance and stability of the structure. During the time that Schwitters was developing the Merz Barn, there had formed a river of water flowing through its middle, and later the wall was removed from its original site in the middle of a very wet rural landscape as a result of rising and penetrating damp, which was decaying the artwork. I'm sitting here with the Merz Barn Wall and the air surrounds me. The green paint is fraught with air bubbles and the climate is monitored at all times. It's been 57 years since the wall arrived, and for a year it sat outside the gallery in a hut specifically built to shield it from the weather. An electric heater was placed inside the hut to dry the wall out until it was ready to be installed on the 20th of June 1966, on what would have been Schwitters' 79th birthday. Sorry, just take some water. Advice on handling and storage. Storage display recommended ideal conditions. Temperature 18 degrees Celsius, maximum change 5 degrees Celsius over any 24-hour period. Relative humidity 55%, maximum change 5% in any 24-hour period. The maintenance of the Merz Barn Wall is a continual lifelong commitment for the Hatton Gallery. Its longevity depends upon their ability to keep track of, record and minimise any fluctuating environmental conditions. An awareness of this can allow us to appreciate the material composition and perpetual liveness of the wall more fully as something which continues to be permeable to changes in atmosphere as a fluid medium. The wall remains part of an environment composed of and susceptible to air and moisture. Condition reports, commissioned since the wall was first installed, continually refer to the threat of damp and advise on the correct temperature and humidity levels within the gallery to ensure the longevity and stability of the artwork. They articulate what Tim Ingold describes as the underbelly of things. Materials may lie low, but are never entirely subdued. Moisture reveals itself through the flaking and separation of paint from plaster, in the surface cracking and in the corrosion of materials. And the image in the PowerPoint just now is a photograph of fragments that had been collected from the floor of the Merz Barn Wall when it was being removed in 1965. Scans of paint samples show the presence of air bubbles and iron oxides from pigments and rust. They expose the underlying activity that lurks beneath the now smooth outer layers of retouched paint. The composition of air in this X-ray scan is inferred by the conservator's notes. The green includes air bubbles. And as we move closer to explore the broken aerated surface, it envelops us to become a spatial expanse. This perspectival shift towards an enveloping experience of surface as sculptural form is reminiscent of Schwitters' small-scale sculptural work made in the last decade of his life, particularly in England, described by Megan Luke as sculptures that demand that we stay close to the surface rather than bypass it on the way to an invisible form-giving centre or transcendental concept. Luke notes the indeterminacy of this work in which we can consistently lose our bearings, implying that a close reading of space can facilitate a more contingent experience of fragmentation over definite form. And I would argue that this preoccupation with surface is also expressed through Schwitters' aerated work. This print from my aerated series provides an ambiguous space that can be read simultaneously as both surface and atmosphere, aeriform and ground. It is an image of the weather and a weathered surface. The space refers to both the micro and macro. We're drawn to examine the detail, whilst presented with a continuous expansive surface that refers to and is of the atmosphere, echoing the words of Tim Ingold, who states that wherever we look, the ground bears witness to the liveliness of the processes that have gone on or are going into its formation, to the effects of rain, wind, frost, and so on. Similarly, the aerated print could be considered a form of archival container, an impression and time-based record of atmosphere penetrating ground, and moreover, a tool to make more visible the presence of air as a material and physical force. Ingold observes that to describe the properties of materials is to tell the stories of what happens to them as they flow, mix, and mutate. And these stories involve multiple actors that may help us to better access the past and heighten our awareness of the present, to take note of the life cycle of materials that extends into the future. To discuss the properties of materials in relation to an artifact such as the Merz Barn Wall necessitates that we contemplate its entanglement with the world around us and appreciate the traces of movement and connectivity, the liveliness of these interfaces between surface and environment where materials meet. As we contemplate the dry stone wall as a zone of formative and transformative processes, we may dig down into the material composition of rock, move through the paint layers to be confronted by bubbles of air, or even move out to contemplate the wall in its entirety as an artifact existing within the Hatton Gallery in an environment filled with air. Temperature 18 to 21 degrees Celsius, relative humidity 55%. And that's the end of the talk today. Thanks very much to everyone who joined this Zoom talk today. Please feel free to get in touch with me through the Hatton Gallery if you have any questions or would like some more information about anything that I've mentioned in the course of the talk. Okay, thank you very much.